Hey, yo, put that down, man. What did I tell you about reading in here? Don't you remember what reading did to my family? Hey, what's good, Joe? Soul here, and welcome back to the story mode. So, I have a question, one that very obviously pertains to what we're talking about today, but are you much of a reader? I mean, granted, you probably do at least a little bit of light reading, right? I mean, you're a Pokemon fan, so you can't really truly enjoy these games without being able to read the text. So, to an extent, you are something of a reader. But outside of the gaming sense, how do you feel about books? If you ever find yourself reading, do you feel yourself leaning more towards the action and fantasy aspects, or maybe the comedy and the romance? Whatever the answer to that question may be, I have a follow-up question. Would you read actual, properly published Pokemon novels if they were a thing? And in this case, I am specifically referring to books, novels, words on the page, not the graphic novels, not the manga. I ask this because I thought about it a little while back and realized there are no Pokemon novels for some weird reason. I have my theories and queries as to why that might possibly be the case, but for the most part, I still think it's strange that they just never took advantage of that market whatsoever. Fun little fact about me, I, at some point, would kind of like to be something of a writer if that's possible. I like fantasy a lot, and so whenever I get into something new, especially in the fantasy aspect that has a lot of world and lore to get into, I like to start from the very beginning and learn as much as humanly possible about that thing. And something that I've come to learn over the years is that books, specifically novels, are usually some of the best ways to attain that. Novels seem to have less restrictions than any other form of media that I've ever seen, and because of that, they're kind of allowed to play with anything and everything however they want. Naturally, of course, that can absolutely apply to video games and anime and anything within that realm, but books usually just seem to have whatever freedom it wants, and I love that. Of course, it can be a little bit harder because you don't really have the visual elements to back you up, which means that you really have to paint a picture utilizing your words, and that can be a little bit of a challenge, but when done successfully, it can make something really magical. Which is why I'm always going to be appalled that Pokemon has yet to capitalize on this, because it is one of the biggest, if not the biggest media franchise on this planet. And don't get it twisted, I love the manga. I have a bunch of Pokemon manga. But the way that these manga are made don't really give the same effect that a novel could. Does that make any sense? A graphic novel by nature is always going to be a hell of a lot shorter and significantly smaller than a regular standard novel. Which is why I usually feel like I'm getting a lot less information out of a graphic novel than I could be out of a regular novel. I do have the Five Nights at Freddy's official novels. Now, I'm not saying any more on that topic. But I say that specifically because I have seen the comparisons between both the graphic novel and the official novel, and I could definitely see that there's a lot of moments where I feel like I'm getting a lot more information from the words on the page than I am from the pictures on the page. Hence why I would really like some Pokemon novels. But they're not doing that. So I have one more follow-up question. Why don't you go ahead, sit down, get cozy, grab a nice cool glass of water, maybe some milk. Appears to be about lunchtime about now, so why don't you go ahead, grab those pork chops that you've been saving up for a while, put those suckers on the grill, make sure you absolutely slather that in Miracle Whip, and let's ask the question, why doesn't modern Pokemon have novels? My first initial guess is that maybe they believe that their audience may be a little too young to care about a regular novel? I mean, granted, we are currently in an age where a lot of kids probably aren't reading nearly as much as they could be, especially with this just heavy overhaul of electronics and things like that, which is why they prefer to just give us everything information-wise through the games and things like that. But call me old or whatever, but I was for sure most definitely at the Scholastic Book Fair every year when I was younger in like elementary and stuff like that. I was picking up books here and there whenever I got the chance. There's a reason why series like Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, The Magic Tree House, and Warrior Cats got so popular. It's because kids were reading at the time. But it's strange to me now more than ever that even then, during that era where everybody was reading a little bit of something here and there, that they never capitalized on that and made like regular novels. What a weird time, because I don't really remember even finding Pokemon manga back then, but I do remember buying the massive like Sinnoh encyclopedia. Do you remember when they made those massive encyclopedias for the entirety of the region with every ounce of information? You know, those were so cool. So sad that they don't do that anymore, but there's really no point. Regardless though, they didn't do it then, and they're definitely not doing it now because they maybe feel like younger audiences, especially nowadays, are not interested in reading in that format. Okay, well, at the very least, they have to be aware that a lot of those kids that grew up on Pokemon have been grown up for some time now, and they would probably be willing to read these books if you were to put them out. Or is it possible that they're a little nervous that modern audiences won't read? Well, I guess that it isn't too hard to believe something like that, given that books don't sell nearly as well as like a show or a movie or a game would, right? That's totally fine. But with something as massive as Pokemon, I find it hard to believe that a well-written book wouldn't sell well in the space, given the fact that there's a lot of us readers that are very hungry for books that would explain more lore and information on the characters and stories that we love in modern media. I am a massive fan of Arcane, not League of Legends, just to make that very clear. After Season 2 ended, I ended up finding out that there was a companion novel that explains a lot of information surrounding a specific character and her situation. I went out and bought that book as soon as I possibly could. Now, if I'm willing to go out of my way to do something like that for Arcane, and I have to imagine a lot of other people feel the same way, I can't imagine that Pokemon would have any less success than that. Especially if they were to make sure to put those books in front of the modern audiences. Could you imagine during a Pokemon Presents where they actually announce that there's a major Pokemon novel coming up? I think a lot of people would for sure be into that depending on the contents of it, but we'll talk more about that. However though, I guess I could see their concern because the reader audience is extremely hit or miss. I just so happen to be on the side of the internet where people actually do enjoy reading. Again, I do want to be a little bit of a writer, so I kind of delve into that side a lot, so maybe I'm just not seeing the bigger picture here, but overall, I don't know, I think it couldn't hurt to do something like that. The last thing that I have written here as to why they might not be doing something like that is because they don't have the lore masters to do something like that, but that's actually not the case now that I think about it. I don't know if it got translated or if it's getting translated or ever getting ported out to the US in any way, shape, or form, but they did recently somewhere put out a Pokecology book. To my understanding, it's like a massive book that explains how Pokemon operate and how they work with their environment and just a big scientific study of the nature of Pokemon. Really fascinating. A little hard to do something like that, though, if you didn't have lore masters keeping track of major Pokemon lore and things like that, right? So there's people there that are able to do stuff like that. Why don't we have writers that are capable of making novels, maybe with the help of these people, to really get a general idea and sense of what the world would actually feel like in book format? I just simply don't think it would be all that ridiculous. There are people that are capable of handling a task like that. They just don't want to do that for whatever reason, and it's just baffling to me as to why the hell not. Oh, Soul, you're such a dweeb. What a nerd. Why don't you go ahead and just go back through all the games and make up theories and fan fictions like everybody else? Because sometimes I want to be a purist and have actual genuine canon lore. Sue me. So, a couple of you are probably wondering, Soul, why do you want books and novels for Pokemon so badly? Is it really that serious? Well, to me, yes, it kind of is. Like I said in my previous video, one of the most important things to me is potential when it comes to a story and its world, and Pokemon is completely ripe with that, and it always has been. There is such an insane amount of untapped potential that it boggles my mind as to why they haven't taken advantage of some of this stuff yet. Giving us books that would help explain so many of the unexplained things that happen in Pokemon, that happen off screen, that we don't necessarily get to see, would be so beneficial to even previous games in the franchise. For example, I really do think that books could do the best job of assisting with world building and lore. For example, I would love to follow a character who discovered Mega Evolution for the first time to see how it works. I feel like the same situation could definitely be applied to the other gimmicks that we've had. I would love to see situations in which we discover Z moves or Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing, see all of the different sciences and histories around it, and you know, what characters were involved when discovering this stuff and how it all came to be, what relationships they had with these discoveries and the people around them. Stuff that necessarily wouldn't be as interesting to follow in a game as it would in its own separate unique story. I would love to follow a story that's unique to like Giratina or something, and how its reverse world is in conjunction with the real world and how they operate separate from each other. I would love actual genuine information on that because, you know, again, the movies are already not even canon in, you know, the sense of the anime, so they're definitely not canon in terms of the games either, you know? So I would just love to see little tidbits of information on that, and if we could get a whole book out of it, turn it into a little bit of a story with a character following Giratina and things like that. I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of potential that we could garner from that. Now, very clearly, the most important aspect of novels, I think, that could really help is character development. I've talked about the untapped potential of a lot of these characters and their stories for years, and I feel like novels could definitely help flesh these characters out even more when the games don't really have the chance to. Could you imagine a book title called Pokemon Johto: The Tale of Silver? I personally would absolutely leap at the chance to learn a lot more about Silver because the information that we've got is so scattered and like uncertain a lot of the time that I feel like we almost have nothing. I would love to learn about Silver's life growing up as the son of Giovanni, you know, who's his mother? What's his situation? Why did he turn out so like generally angry and things like that? There's just so much information that we could learn about Silver that's just not present in the games like they could be, or even in the manga, I think. Like, did he raise himself? Was Giovanni like even around? Or like, what was his home life like? Was he like in the system or something like that? Or like, how did that even work? Was he supposed to be a Team Rocket grunt? He was supposed to eventually take over Team Rocket, but he defied his father at the last minute when he was older? Is that how that happened? I really feel like I don't know as much as we could. And I think we've only seen one canon interaction between him and his father Giovanni in an event that's not even available anymore, you know? So there's stuff like that, but then what about characters that really got no screen time? For example, I would love to learn more about Marnie. I have to remember where I found this information, but there was like something about how Morpeko is the reason as to why Marnie is so like withheld with her emotions and things like that. There's some weird connection between her and Morpeko as to why she's so like weird with her emotions and things like that. And I would really like to see why that came to be. I would absolutely love to follow a story about Marnie and what her upbringing was like when it comes to Morpeko and what it's like having Piers as a brother, why he didn't utilize Dynamaxing or Gigantamaxing even as a gym leader, how he became a gym leader, how that relationship came to be, what her relationship is with Team Yell and things like that, why that's even a thing. It's just so much that we could be learning about, and I don't know, I would just love to learn more about that. Or even in that same vein, a story about Leon and Sonia and about their journeys together, because apparently they were pretty damn good friends back in the day. You know, I would love to see what their journey was like together, how they came to be, and how Leon became one of, if not the strongest Pokemon trainer to the point where he was undefeatable. You know, what strats was he using? Who was challenging him? What was his inner monologue like when fighting people that he knew he wasn't going to lose against? Because I have to imagine that at some points he got bored until our characters showed up to take the win from him finally. And that must have been the most exciting battle of his life. You know, I would love to see what his inner monologue was like during that and what his journeys looked like to become that, you know? And maybe even learning what his relationship with his brother is like, or if he even realized until the end how much of a shadow he put his brother in, because they've really never even tapped much into that storyline, or at least not from Leon's end of things, but we definitely saw a little bit of that coming out from Hobson, you know? And I would absolutely adore getting more in depth in something like that. And I don't know about y'all, but personally, I feel like we are missing out on a lot of very interesting information when it comes to Nemona. Where did her extremely dedicated passion for battling even originate from? What's her relationship like with her sister? What's her relationship like with her family? Like, what is the deal with all of that? Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, The Tale of Nemona. I would eat that up, man. I would kill that. But do you get what I'm getting at? Dedicated novels that highlight all of these characters and give them more story, lore, and a more fleshed out character, so that when we do go back into these games at some point, we could really see like where these points came from, like why these characters are the way that they are, and we have a much deeper understanding and a much better appreciation for who they are as characters. I just think that books could do a really splendid job with that. Of course, not that games aren't capable of doing something like this, but given the limitations when it comes to making games, how expensive they are, you can only spend so much time on a character in game before it starts to get old and you need to move on to other things, right? I feel like doing this in book format gives you all the space and freedom that you need to highlight and focus on one specific thing, specifically characters in this case. In that same vein though, I feel like it would help a lot to get even more lore on villains too. Tell me you wouldn't be interested in reading the Book of Giovanni. Oh my god, that would go crazy! In the bits and pieces of him that we've seen in the games and things like that, and even in like the little like shorts like Pokemon Generations and stuff like that, we've seen that this is no dumb leader. Like, he knows what he's doing, and he knows and is very aware that he's extremely capable of very dangerous things and takes advantage of everything in his path. It's crazy how interesting of a character Giovanni could be, and I think that a book fleshing out his mindset, how he got to the point where he was, I just feel like that would just be insane to read. That would be so cool. Maybe it's even possible that we could get more justice for characters like Rose, and we could get more information on his motives and everything that he was planning, what led up to his panic, his initial panic that made it so that he unleashed the darkest day like 1,000 years ahead of schedule. Like, that's just genuinely insane, and a lot of us are probably just wondering, like, why would he do something like that? Like, what is it that pushed him to the brink so bad that he just needed to have it handled like now, right? Like, there were definitely situations in which Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing randomly throughout the world was getting bad, but like, I don't know. I feel like doing what he did was just outrageous, and I feel like there could be a little more context to that that could help, you know, solidify his position, his thought process as chairman, you know? So I would love to learn his situation with that, his situation with Oleana, and just generally speaking, a little more information about his rise to power and things like that. So I think I would definitely cave and buy a little book talking about the tale of Chairman Rose. I would definitely look into that, you know? Especially if it gives more context to things, because I feel like we're just missing a lot of context and story when it comes to Generation 8 in general. So, you know, that's why I've harped so much on a lot of these characters getting their own unique stories. But, you know, there's still plenty of characters that could get, you know, more unique stories. Can you imagine how many people would buy a book about Cynthia? Oh my god, don't even get me started, dog. But generally speaking, yes, I feel like it could definitely help with a lot of motivations for characters and their actions and just everything regarding their personality, because we could get a much more fleshed out story that the games simply can't give us, because we simply don't have the time to focus on those characters like we would be able to in a book. And I think it would just be really fun and cool to have situations in which, like, we have super unique stories of things that happen, like, after the major events of other regions and things like that, that aren't as, like, large scale as something like, you know, Pokemon Legends ZA, for example, but maybe something cool and smaller scale that could maybe introduce us to other characters that could be introduced as like fun little cameos and things like that in future games. I feel like that would just be fun little connections to make it so that the books have, you know, lore, info, and knowledge that could really bring something fun to the table for people that, you know, spent the time investing in those stories and characters. Like, I definitely would love a situation in which, even though this isn't necessarily like a new character, but could you imagine something like Seth and his adventures after the initial events of Pokemon Coliseum, and then we maybe get to see him in a cameo later on down the line in canon Pokemon? I feel like that would be really, really cool. You know, I feel like that'd be a fun way to canonize his events and, you know, what he's been through as a character, and I feel like he could be made into something of a mentor or just something really neat for the Pokemon franchise. I don't know. I just think that would be neat. Now, I'm sure there's a good handful of you guys thinking, well, why bother with that when, you know, they could do all this stuff in the manga? They kind of are doing stuff like this in the manga. And like, You could say that, but also not really, right? My problem with the Pokemon stories is that every universe has its own separate canon. The anime has its own separate canon. The manga has their own separate canon. Both of them completely separate from the games. Yeah, both of them refer to the character's likeness and utilize that for the stories that they present in the anime, in the manga, but for the most part, the primary canon has always been the games because that's where a majority of the fan base is. Which is why I don't think it would be all that insane to have books that are directly canon and parallel to the main lore, the game's lore. The Pokemon manga, while they are very fun and they kind of do their own unique thing with the characters, they just for the most part are a fun way of retelling the stories that we already know about in the games. Even the Pokemon Diamond and Pearl Adventures, which had its own unique cast of main characters with Haretta and stuff like that, they still primarily followed the main story, even if they did unique stuff with their characters, which I appreciate a lot. That is my favorite set of Pokemon manga ever. They're so fun, holy crap. But I wish they would do more stuff like that, but in actual book novel format. Essentially what I'm saying is the books and the manga could have their own separate roles. Manga readers could have their fun if they don't really feel like playing the games or they want to re-experience the games. They could just re-experience them in a new light through the manga. But books could serve as a way to recontextualize the actual lore that we actually already know of in the mainline games so that we can get more information on the world, its lore, its history, its backgrounds, the characters, their story, their motivations, their developments, and why they are the way that they are. Call me crazy for thinking this way, but in the last couple of years, I've been reading more books, and I would just love to see more medias do stuff like this to get more information out of their stories that they're creating. And Pokemon is just so ripe with that kind of thing. I'm truly, genuinely shocked that we don't have stuff like this. I mean, at the end of the day, they don't really need to do that, but again, they don't need to do stuff like Pokecology. They don't need to do the short miniseries that give little tidbits of lore pieces here and there, like Pokemon Generations and Pokemon Evolutions and things like that. They don't have to do that stuff, but they do for the love of the game, which is why I would love a situation in which they do take advantage and give more love to the book side of things, to the novel side of things, because I feel like things could get really, really interesting if we did something like that. But hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me. So that just about wraps it up for this one. This was supposed to be the filler video. This was not even made until after the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet re-review, which, again, that wasn't intended to be as long as it is, but it doesn't matter. It's getting hot in here, so I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. But before I do, I'm passing the mic over to you guys, and I want you guys to tell me everything that you're thinking in the comment section below. Do you agree that novels could definitely help solidify the Pokemon universe, and we could get a lot more context and information on the world and the characters and their motivations, and we could really benefit from something like that? Or are you on the opposing side? We don't really need that. Nobody would read them. You don't really care about novels anyway. We just need to get more information in the games, and that is it. That's all we really need. Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I'm always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, yes sir, it appears to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and do just that. I would like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm Gonzo. Thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor of taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!